Ibn Tumart gains followers. He basically tells the story that he's the Mahdi, and that just propels him. He invades Marrakesh, takes over. They destroy Marrakesh. They kill all men. They enslave even the Muslims. They enslave Muslims. It was very like yes, we had that feeling of caliphate, but it was still very divided, and it was localized. We have to understand that communication was not fast. Things were not like today, where we have instant news of what's going on in Gaza. Everything took more time the news took more time to arrive, and so the feeling of a connected ummah didn't matter to a local Berber in the Sousse region. Why does it matter what happens to the Khalifa in Baghdad? It's thousands and thousands of kilometers away, and he has no impact on them. For the let's say the Berber peasants in the Sousse region is just worried about his tax, the tax that he has to pay to the immediate leader in the vicinity or the bigger country or states. So in practicality, in all actuality, it didn't really matter what happened in the other side of the Muslim war. When you struggle among Muslim Berbers to unite for a common cause, and not talking about the Arabs, not talking about it's. After a couple of years, when Yusuf Ibn Tashfin saw that things just weren't improving, and the petty kings just kept fighting and infighting, he had enough, basically, and sent an embassy to Baghdad, to the Khilafah, to basically have a fatwa from the ulama in the east that justifies the takeover of Al-Andalus. But the Almoravids were also known as the dynasty of the fuqaha. Basically, every single one of the leaders, we're talking about Abdul-Rahman, the founder, Abu Bakr ibn Umar, the second leader, Yusuf ibn Tashfin, Ali bin Yusuf, all of them were fuqaha of the highest degrees. They were very knowledgeable in deen, and they could have issued their fatwa themselves, but they wanted the Muslim world to be united on this decision. This is why they sent the embassy to Baghdad to really make sure that as an ummah we agree on this. Let's imagine you're in the Battle of Sagrahas and you're a Christian, right? You're a Christian and you're in the front line and you're fighting, and at some point to your flank you have a bunch of desert Bedouins, all covered. You can only see their eyes with spears and shields rushing to you.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Marouane, and welcome onto the CounterNarrative. I think it's an honor actually to have you here, considering the field of research and the production you're involved in with the very wonderful channel, Akhlaq and Izzah, something that I recommend most of us actually take time to subscribe to and to follow, inshallah. What I find interesting about your project is that it focuses on a specific part of Islamic history that is often overlooked, but one that, especially for us modern Muslims and those who reside in the Western Hemisphere, is closest to home in many different ways. So your invitation today was actually very timely and very, very important for us as an audience and for listeners to get a glimpse into one of the darkest chapters of the Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula. But before I begin, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience? Who you are, what you do, your project, so on and so forth.
I'll start with Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salat, salam ala rasulillah. So my name is Marouane. You can also call me by my kunya Abu Ghalia. I'm the creator of the channel Akhlaq and Izzah. The channel was intended to be the Islamic version, to be perfectly clear, the Islamic version of Kings and Generals. That was the kind of goal. So animated format, is focused on Islamic history and also from the Muslim perspective. That was the intended goal.
Which is actually a very good introduction. Tell us a bit more about the topic, the theme, that genre, because you have a very specific niche when it comes to the history you cover.
Correct. So I focus specifically on the time that I spend the research, or the topic that I spent most time studying, is the 11th century relationship between the Andalus and the Maghreb. So this is really the bulk of my time in terms of research and reading, and it's a fascinating era for so many reasons, and there's so much to be, so much wisdom and lessons to be drawn from that period for us today. It's very very modern. To like you can really see things that happened back then. You can see them today, and you can see them throughout our history. And it's a fascinating period. It's a very sad period, obviously for us, because it's the rise and fall of the Andalus, basically. And the fall was spectacular, sad but spectacular. I'll say that much for start.
And many parallels, as you mentioned, there are many parallels, many lessons, especially within the political sphere. We're experiencing right now a lot of catastrophic events in the Middle East and different parts of the world. And one of the questions we ask as Muslims is, where is the Muslim Ummah? Where is this global unity of Muslims? Where is the support? Where is the political connection? But if we were to look back at the history of what happened in Al-Andalus, the latter phase of it, the decline, we can see where the errors were made. And unfortunately, where those same errors are being repeated today. So I think it's a timely opportunity for us to revise that history, which you're going to help us do today, inshallah. And to really kind of do a post-mortem analysis as to what went wrong with that community, despite the fact that it was actually a very preeminent and an amazing civilization, really, the jewel of Europe at some points. How did it go so terribly wrong, brother? What happened exactly? You know, take us to somewhere where we can begin this journey.
Do exactly that, inshallah. So we'll start with the context. It's the 10th century, and the Caliphate of Cordoba is, as you put it, the jewel of civilization. It's the highest, it's at its highest peak. It's the highest level of civilization that I think has been attained. You could make an argument for Baghdad at the same time, or like a few decades or maybe centuries before, but it's there, it's up there, and the only difference would be the size. We're looking in terms of size. Cordoba, according to different researchers, would be 1/4, so one district of Baghdad, and we're talking about the splitting in four of Baghdad. It would be 25%, and we're looking in terms of population anywhere between 250k to 400k inhabitants, compared to the 1 million in Baghdad that we are accustomed.
Which in modern standards, not to interrupt you, for those who may not understand what this actually means, is like a mega city in modern standards, right? To have 1 million human beings.
Because if we compare it to, let's say, cities of European, Western Europe, cities like Paris or London at the time, I'll have to check the figures, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't more than 20,000 people in those cities in that time. So it's a massive, massive difference, and we'll get into the reasons why. So the 10th century saw basically that peak, and under three different rulers, and we'll go through each of them. The first one, obviously, is Abdul-Rahman III. He ruled for 50, close to 50 years, from 912 to 961. His successor was Al-Hakim II, and the successor was Al-Mansur. So that time period, we're looking from 912 to 1002. And 1002 to 1008, this is where the instability starts to really grow. The seeds are a bit more, the seeds of the instability starts a bit before, a bit earlier, but this is where like the instability really starts to take shape. And from 1008, it's a full fitna until 1030 to 31. And from there, 1031 until 1092, it's the time period where the Taifa, what would be known as the statelets, the small Taifa states, are existing and will be come to an end in 1092-93 with the coming of the Almoravids, the Morabitun, from Northwest Africa, the Maghreb region. So this is just the context of our, what we'll be talking about. Now, let's talk quickly about why Cordoba was that brilliant at the time. There's many reasons, and that wealthy. It was a very wealthy land, and there are many factors for that. The first one, obviously, Abdul-Rahman III has developed very deep relationships with the Berber, the Amazigh chieftains of North Africa. And why that is, he did it because there's this important trade, which was basically gold and slaves, a trade coming from the Sudan region. And when I say Sudan, I mean the historical Sudan, which is
A vast sub-Sahara.
all the way down to Timbuktu, that area. That area was always been rich in gold, and it still is today. Mali today is the #1 producer of gold, if I'm not mistaken. Another reason would be the Abdul-Rahman III. The rule was quite, let's put it this way, reminiscent of the Abbasids' raids into Byzantine lands. There was yearly raid into Christian lands. Obviously, those were very, very profitable. With they would take booty, they would come back with slaves. Some of them, prisoners of war, would be of very, very high value, like bishops or priests, or some very notable people, and those would be of high value. They would ransom them back into the Christian lands, and they would obviously get some very high value from it. Back then, there was also what is used to be, or what is called by historians, the Green Revolution. They introduced a lot of different new crops that were were not from that region, which made there was a flourishing in agriculture, like the different new fruits, new vegetables that weren't really, and that really participated into the growth of the population. Like, people were actually eating fruits and vegetables and having very, very leading very healthy lives for the most part, especially compared to the rest of the world. There was nothing like it. That agricultural development was facilitated by the technology, the advance in technology, in the irrigation technology. So you can imagine that irrigation was existing, but there was some very, very, very significant progress made there. And yeah, all of that participated, or like drove the population to be, so that it drove prices down, it drove taxation down, and it just made the Cordoban population basically increase many folds compared to the rest of the world. And that's obviously a high population is always a sign of a state's good health. That was to explain the source of the wealth of the Cordoban states, and that was mostly, as I said, under the rule of Abdul-Rahman III. Now, maybe I can illustrate this the state of Cordoba and the wealth of Cordoba by there's a quote by a historian of the time, and I thought it was very interesting. So I'll just read the quote. I don't know it by heart. It's Ibn Hawkal, a chronicler of the times, and he has this to say about Cordoba. The biggest city in Spain is Cordoba, which has no equal in the Maghreb and hardly in Egypt, Syria, or Mesopotamia, for the size of its population, its extent, the space occupied by its markets, the cleanliness of its streets, the architecture of its mosques, the number of its baths and caravanserais. Natives of Cordoba who have traveled to Mesopotamia say that it is about the same size as one of the divisions of Baghdad, which comes back to what we were talking about in terms of the size of Cordoba compared to Baghdad. So that gives you an idea of how prosperous was Cordoba, and that's, to me, it's really important to know that, because what happens next is the fall, and you'll see from where we were to where now we've gotten after the events that we'll get into soon. So after the rule of Abdul-Rahman III came, so he died in 961, and came his successor Al-Hakam II. Now Al-Hakam is mostly known as a patron of the arts and the sciences. He was a very big supporter of that. He would bring people from all over the world in all different fields. We have from that time we have a very popular example of the Banu Zuhr. The Banu Zuhr they were a dynasty of doctors from father to son, and I'm saying like dynasty because we're talking now about the 10th century, and it went all the way up to, if I'm not mistaken, 14th and 15th century. We have clear example of the 13th century of doctors from the Banu Zuhr being the main doctors, the personal doctors to the rulers in Morocco, in the northwest. It was under the Almohads. That specific doctor, who was the main doctor of the Sultan in Morocco, who was, when I say Morocco, I mean modern day Morocco, but he was the Muwahhidun, was at the time Yaqub al-Mansur. Yaqub al-Mansur was so impressed by the Banu Zuhr, the member of the Banu Zuhr dynasty, by his knowledge and presence, and that he told him, I'll give you anything. But there's one thing I'll never give you. I won't let you go free. I need you by my side all the time. And that was obviously a sweet, bitter deal with for the Banu Zuhr, the member of the Banu Zuhr dynasty, because I can't remember his name, so I'll just say the member of the Banu Zuhr, because he was from Seville originally, and he has very fond memories of Seville, and he even wrote a poem about his days in Seville and how sad he was. And the Sultan Yaqub Mansur was so like he wanted to please him so much, he sent a group of architects to Seville to study his house and the areas, and they reproduced a copy 1-for-1 in Marrakesh, and some of it still exists today. It's amazing. So yeah, that was how much that was a quick, let's say, diversion to the talk about we're talking about the Banu Zuhr and the Al-Hakam being a patron of the art and the sciences and so on. Now Al-Hakam dies in 978 after 15-ish years of rule. We're still talking about again Cordoba being at its peak. What started to happen now is that with the rule of Al-Hakam, it's something that's very, very important, and we have to pay attention to this. Al-Hakam started a tradition of bringing in military from overseas, from the north, from the Moroccan region to the northwest Africa. Specifically, he brought in Berber tribal units, whole tribal units, complete with their structure, with the same commander, the leaders. Just take the whole unit, bring it in, and that was used for his own security and to strengthen the army. And we'll talk about that, why this is really important in a bit. So comes now the rule of Al-Mansur. Al-Mansur was a vizier under Abdul-Rahman III, and his rule was from 978 to 1002. So we're talking about 24 years. It was 24 years of hammering the Christian lands. It was back to the Orthodox Islam, jihad, raids. I think we're talking about 57 raids in 24 years. It's comparing to the times of Harun al-Rashid. I believe Harun al-Rashid would raid 1 year and rest the second year and go and go to Hajj the second year. But now we're talking about 2 years raids a year. That's a very, very
and just out of what was driving this, because we have certain modernist interpretations of jihad, for example, as a state policy, that it was always defensive. Because what you're mentioning here is something that's actually a prolific campaign that is maintained over several years. Surely it wasn't all defensive. So what was driving this effort to continually push into the Christian regions?
No, this was clearly offensive, and if you believe most Orientalist sources, this was not made for any Islamic reason, but mostly for profit and for booty. There's probably some truth to that. It's not foreign to Islamic theology to have raids on Christian lands in some situations. So I wouldn't rule that out either. So it's a bit of both. And he was also basically taking this from the reign of Abdul-Rahman III, was very keen on image and really legitimacy. A funny anecdote about Abdul-Rahman III, about his wanting to be a legitimate caliph. He actually was 3/4 Spanish. So his mother was Christian. When I say Spanish, you get the meaning. His mother was Christian, and his grandmother was also Christian, which means he was basically blonde, blue-eyed. And to appear as a more legitimate caliph, he dyed his beard black.
Wow. So he had a blonde beard, effectively.
But it's a quote from a Christian chronicler. After Al-Mansur's death, he wrote that he was seized by the devil and buried in hell. He was a scourge of the Christians, and his removal from the scene was an act of divine mercy. So obviously, this is the Christian point of view. From the Muslim perspective, he was seen as a pious leader. He would bring his copy of his own personal copy of the Quran to his campaign every time. So he was definitely, it's definitely seen as a pious and just from the Islamic perspective, just a ruler. So now comes his death in 1002, and this is where what Al-Mansur did is he piled on that policy of bringing in Berber units, tribal units from North Africa for his protection and his army, and he just did more of it. And that was a problem because in Al-Andalus at that time, there were already frictions between Arabs and Berbers that were already installed there from the times of Tariq ibn Ziyad's invasion. There were always frictions between the two, and they remained, and they even got a bit more, let's say, more vivid, especially since they were different in nature. Like the Arab was more urban and more, let's say, refined, whereas the Berber, the Amazigh, was a bit on the rough side and a bit more warrior-like. Which is, if we draw a comparison with the Abbasids, they did the same, and that's arguably that also led to the end of the effective Abbasid rule. When I say effective, I mean the Abbasids, Caliph being the actual leaders and rulers. Because as we know, the Abbasids, I believe it was Al-Ma'mun in 18. So Al-Ma'mun reigned from 1817 to 817 to 832, I believe. That's when he reigned. And it was not Berbers for Al-Ma'mun, but it was Turkish warriors and Turkish tribes, and they were basically assuring his protection, and he was refurnishing his army with it, resupplying his army with it. And over time, as the institution of the Khilafah broke down or was weakened, they would take matters in their own hands, especially when there's bound to be a caliph in the succession line that is a weak caliph that doesn't have what it takes to be a strong leader, and it happens also so in the Andalusian time. So where there's a caliph in the line of succession, which was basically a puppet. It's Hisham II. They basically made him spend his teenage days with women and wine, and I guess that there was probably why he ended up like he was. But there's always a nature to it. Like you can't have a line of a line of, I don't know, 200 years of successful and very capable caliphs. I don't think it ever happened in history. Khair. So yeah, this is really the beginning of the problems in Al-Andalus. Now we're starting to have very, very very clear and vivid tensions between the Berbers and the Andalusi Arabs. And in 1008, everything goes to hell. The Berbers, subtribes of Sanhaja, because they come from a very specific tribe in Northwest Africa, which is called Sanhaja. This adds another level of complexity to the Andalusi politics scene, because it's not just Muslim versus Christians or Arabs versus Berbers. It's also Berber tribes versus other Berber tribes.
So tribalism effectively is triggered.
So now the Berber tribes that were brought originally under Al-Hakam and pursued under Al-Mansur are active politically, and they have power, and they're pushing their own caliph, Suleiman. They push him in 1008 to be the new caliph. And there's another, it's a descendant of Abdul-Rahman III. And there's another one, Muhammad II, who's also pushed by another tribe of Berbers. And basically the clash, there's a civil war. Suleiman, the one that is pushed by the Sanhaja tribes, wins. He gets a form of power, but it's very messy things just go south. The Berbers start to rampage. The cities, Cordoba is destroyed. When I say destroyed, like rampage, obviously they're still not everything was destroyed. But it's all chaos. The Berbers are basically taking their revenge on the hatred that they felt from the Arabs, and they're just destroying everything. So this mess really basically lasted from 1008 to 1031, where we have a total breakdown of there's no central authority anymore. So now what we see happening is small statelets everywhere in Andalus taking form. And they would either take form by the way of a coup, like in Granada. In Granada, we have the Banu Ziri, which is a tribe from the Sanhaja tribes. The Banu Ziri took control there. They basically forced their way there. We have, for example, in Badajoz, we have a civil administrator that was the administrator of Badajoz, just continue doing his job, except now he doesn't have to send money to the central authority anymore. He continues the job, the business as usual, because at the end of the day, even if it was one caliphate, there was governors and there were civil administrators, and there was also military administrators. We have a very interesting example. I'm pretty sure not a lot of people know this, but slaves didn't come only from Africa. They would come also from Francia, and they would be Slavic slave.
The Saqaliba.
Thank you, Saqaliba, coming from I believe the Balkan region. Yes, and they would be used mainly for administrative and military roles. One of them is known to history as Mujahid al-Amiri. He was an Arabized Slavic slave who basically rose into the military ranks, and at some point, especially during the civil war in 1008, he broke away and went to Denia. Denia is the south of Valencia. It's the eastern corner of Al-Andalus, of Spain. And he built there what would be known as a caliphate of the seas, or like caliphate overseas. He built a thalassocracy of sorts. So from the days of Abdul-Rahman III, we had strong naval bases. One of them was Denia. And he would basically, he took over the Balearic Islands. So we're talking about Minorca and Mallorca. And he even invaded Sardinia, which was very important and very threatening to Rome, because we're talking about, we're just one boat trip away from Rome. So it's a direct threat to Christianity. So he was able to maintain order, or like his authority there for 7 years, but then I believe it was the Genoese and Genoa and Pisa, the republics of Genoa and Pisa, that sent armies on order of the papacy to retake Sardinia. So yeah, he was able to he had to retreat to the Balearic Island and the basic small republic of Denia. But it was a very interesting anecdote in how those small states, break away and form themselves. Yeah, so from 1010 to 1040, almost 30 different states got created, but over time they got swallowed up by the biggest ones. And in 1040 we have 6 states left. So I said Seville, Granada, Badajoz, Saragossa, Valencia, Toledo. I believe that was the 6th one. So we have 6 states, 6 taifas that really become established and have a law and order, and are relatively prosperous. Because after all, they're run. So the people that are running them, yes, we have the image that they were festive, they liked partying and drinking and wine and women, but they were also able men, able commanders, and some of them were fuqaha and qadis, like the leader of the state of Sevilla. Sevilla was the biggest of them all. Sevilla was about, at some point, to really take over and really create another caliphate, but it didn't work out. The leader was Al-Mu'tamid. So Al-Mu'tadid was the father, and then Mu'tamid Ibn Abbad, that's the family, the Banu Abbad. They were basically Qudat, Qadi from father to son. They were poets, they were warriors too. So the Al-Mu'tamid would go to war alongside the Murabitun and Yusuf Ibn Tashfin against the Christians in the Battle of Sagrahas. We'll talk about it. So they really were complex characters. They're not the stereotype we hear of. They were really, and some of them were actual prodigies. Like I believe there was the Emir of Saragossa, who was an actual mathematician, and he wrote full-on mathematical treatises. So these guys were smart people, capable leaders for most of them. Some of them were complete sellouts and sellouts and not very brave or anything or capable. So this is the situation now in 1040. We have those 6 states. The Christians now are taking advantage of the division because they're united, and they're exerting tributes on all of them or most of them, and they're putting one against the other, and helping the Emir of Badakh Hossein power if they would send an army against the Emir of Seville, and so on and so forth. Especially because, as we said, it wasn't just the Muslims. It was Muslim Andalusi Arabs, leaders, versus Muslim Berber of the tribes of Sanhaja, leader, versus another Berber leader in Almeria of the tribe of Zenata, which is a concurrent, like a competing tribe in Morocco. So it's very, very complex, and we won't go into the very complex relationships between every leader, but it's safe to say that it was a very complicated situation that we'll stick to that.
But looking at it from a wider perspective, so that's the situation in the land, within the region itself. It's been fragmented, segmented, people divided, and there are competing factors based on tribalism, based on political interest, based on different categories of, you could say, differences. But when we look at the wider world at that time, we also had the Abbasid Khilafah in Baghdad, which was weakening, but we also had the Fatimids in Egypt. And then within that you have also the Mamluks who will later come in, and there's a lot happening at once, and the Muslim world is not united at that point, is it?
No, it's not united since a very, very long time. One could argue that even during the Sahaba's time, when we had the Zubayrid Caliphate, I believe,
yes.
in Mecca and the Hijaz region. At the same time, we had the Damascus, so the Umayyads in Damascus. One could argue that the Ummah stopped being united since the fitna, basically.
Mm-hmm. But there was an attempt. There was an attempt for unification, and I would say even at that point, even Medina had 2 leaders, by the way, at that point. When Harra, they had 2 leaders, so there were 4 leaders at once at some point, but there was at least the semblance of we should be united, and they were fighting for we should have one Caliph for everyone. But by the time we reach where you are,
yeah, and you could argue that even by the 11th century, when the Abbasid Caliph was a total puppet who barely controlled his own palace, you could argue that there was still the institution of the Caliphate in some way, shape, or form. When you have Yusuf Ibn Tashfin, the leader of the Murabitin, in 1090, he's, just to be clear, he controls northwestern Africa all the way down to Mauritania, current day Mauritania. He has invaded, or he's about to invade Al-Andalus and take over. He has a military might that doesn't exist in the Muslim world at the time, and he still respects the Khilafah of Baghdad as the Khalifa of the all Muslims, and he talks to in the communications that he sent to the Khalifa of Baghdad, he talks in reverence and says that he's just his servant, and so on and so forth. In reality,
exactly, yes, and the same thing with the Seljuks at the time as well, Alp-Arslan. So, but there was a mutual benefit from the perspective of the Abbasid, who could not defend himself anyway. The Khalifa, to be honest with you, was basically sitting duck, as you say. But there was a benefit, politically speaking, in getting the Caliph, who was an Arab of, you could say, Qurayshi stock, and that's also even questionable. But for these sultans or amirs or regional governors to have legitimacy, you need to have the stamp of the big man, right? You needed him, but he needed you also to manage and to defend those bordering regions, which, you know, there was mutual benefit in that sense. But I think the state that resembles where we are today as a Muslim ummah, we talk of the ummah, right? The concept of the ummah. As you said, I think we've lost that concept a long time ago. It was more of a statement of perhaps idealism rather than a reflective of reality. But how would it have looked like if we were to transport ourselves in that period of time? As I said, you've got the Fatimids, you've got the Abbasids, you've got the Umayyad, or what's left of that anyway. What was the general zeitgeist? What was the spirit of the age at that time? Were they thinking collectively, let's help one another, let's unite, let's work together? Or was it more of a still competing, fiercely competing environment?
It's a fair question, but the answer to me is, from my understanding, is pretty clear. When you have when you struggle among Muslim Berbers to unite for a common cause, and not talking about the Arabs, not talking about it was very like yes, we had that feeling of caliphate, and but it was still very divided, and it was localized. We have to understand that communication was not fast. Things were not like today, where we have instant news of what's going on in Gaza. Everything took more time the news took more time to arrive, and so the feeling of a connected ummah it didn't matter to a local Berber in the South region. Why does it matter what happens to the Khalifa in Baghdad? It's thousands and thousands of kilometers away, and he has no impact on them. For the let's say the Berber peasants in the South region is just worried about his tax, the tax that he has to pay to the immediate leader in the vicinity, or the bigger country or states. So in practicality, in all actuality, it didn't really matter what happened in the other side of the Muslim world.
But certainly that apathy, that indifference to what happens in the other part of the ummah, if there was such a thing at that point of time, certainly contributed towards what happens later on in Al-Andalus then, because if we have this, almost you could say, within the sub-unit of the Berbers who had the problem with the Arabs, so you have the Arab versus Berber dynamic, which was going on from the very beginning. Actually, there were still issues there, but then later on you have within the Berber tribes also competing factors. So clearly with this, you could say, this very, very deeply ingrained division amongst the Muslims, and then to add on top of that, that there was no necessary feeling of a greater purpose for the Muslim Ummah, certainly then it becomes easy to understand why it became so almost inevitable for the Christians to come in and just swallow everything up.
Today we are suffering from the division of unity. We're not united in purpose, and we're not united in any way, shape, or form. Obviously, we have a common religion. Alhamdulillah, this is something that no other religion has in the world, I believe. But yes, there is some clear comparisons that can be drawn between the time of the Taifa kings and the time of and today. That's very, very clear.
And what do you think would have been one thing, with hindsight obviously it's always 2020, but looking at some of the regrettable outcomes of that disunity, what do you think could have been a preventative measure, or at least something to slow this gradual decline down? Because we hear, for example, stories of North Africa sending fatwa, or those in Al-Andalus sending requests for fatwa. Very strange requests, actually. Can we marry our daughters off to non-Muslims because we're under duress, because of the desperation they found themselves in later on? But was there anything, or do you think, that may have ameliorated the situation within Al-Andalus?
Well, there was clear attempts, and the first one is the attempt from the Morabitin. The Morabitun came from, so they were founded in Morocco, current-day Morocco, and from 1085, when Toledo fell to the Christians, to Alfonso VI, the Emir of Al-Andalus invited the Almoravids to help them against the Christians, because there was things were just going very, very fast, and Alfonso could have most likely finished the Reconquista by 1085 if the Morabitun didn't help. But So they came for help. They defeated the Christians at the Battle of Sagrajas with the help of the troops of I believe Granada, Seville, and Badajoz. And after a couple of years, when Yusuf Ibn Tashfin saw that things just weren't improving and the petty kings just kept fighting and infighting, he had enough basically and sent an emissary, an embassy to Baghdad, to the Khilafah, to basically have a fatwa from the ulama in the east that justifies the takeover of Al-Andalus.
So forceful intervention.
What happens next is they take over Al-Andalus and they're finally united again. We have one entity, not only in Al-Andalus, but going all the way down to current-day Mauritania. So we have one strip of land that is completely united, which didn't happen in a very long time. And things were going great to some extent. So they were able to retake some territory. They retook Valencia, that was lost to the famous or the infamous El Cid. They were unable, unfortunately, to retake Toledo, but they had some very clear military wins in Al-Andalus, and most of all, we were united. We had a united front again. That was until the Muwahhidun came and said, this is again we coming back to the rivalry between Berber tribes. The Muwahhidun, Muhammad ibn Tumart, I believe, was the leader of the Zanata tribe, which was very, very critical of the Sanhaja tribe, from where the Almoravids came. So those two competing tribes each developed their own state. And the Muwahhidun, when they came to power, when they basically started to get some traction, they were very, very critical of Ali ibn Yusuf Ibn Tashfin, so the son of Yusuf Ibn Tashfin, who was a very pious man, but not an apt politician. And when Ibn Tumart arrived at his court and started to basically criticize in his face what was happening in the region, because Ali ibn Tashfin was a bit more lax than his father. He was not the shrewd politician that you want to have at the head of the state. His advisors, the advisors of Ali ibn Yusuf ibn Tashfin, warned him against Ibn Tumart, and they told him, you should kill this guy, otherwise trouble is coming. And he basically cried from the criticism that was coming to him by Ibn Tumart. And he said, how can I kill this man when he touched my heart so much? He was too, I mean, this is what the history books tell us. He was too emotional and too into maybe too pious, and not enough politically shrewd, I would say so. So in any case, Ibn Tumart gains followers. He basically tells the story that he's the Mahdi, and that just propels him. He invades Marrakesh, takes over. They destroy Marrakesh. They kill all men. They enslave even the Muslims. They enslave Muslims. It's what happens there is very, very sad. But my point in all this, is to say there was an attempt to rectify to move from this direction of disunity and the Ummah, completely divided. There was this attempt by the Murabitun to rectify the shot. The Muwahhidun kept on going even after this massacre that they did. They had some military success in Al-Andalus. They took over. They also, when the Murabitun fell, there was again chaos, as you can imagine, in Al-Andalus. They came in, took over again. There was some clear some form of continuity there. But as history shows, it just takes one inept ruler to trigger a series of events that would.
Well, well, maybe not inept, but it's interesting what you've mentioned here, because Ibn Tashfin, Yusuf Ibn Tashfin, actually got the fatwa from none other than Al-Ghazali, which is a very, very high endorsement. So he endorsed him. That was intervention from a scholarly class and a warrior class, So there was a necessary alliance between the scholars and the political establishment for that unification to happen, which I think is a great lesson for us today to think about. That although it was short-lived, but that was a necessary alliance between the scholars at the time and those who were in a position of power to effect change. And
let me add something here, because it's very interesting, and they were certainly the warrior class, but the Almoravids were also known as the dynasty of the fuqaha. Basically, every single one of the leaders, we're talking about Abdullah ibn Yasin, the founder, Abu Bakr ibn Umar, the second leader, Yusuf ibn Tashfin, Ali bin Yusuf, all of them were fuqaha of the highest degrees. They were very knowledgeable in deen, and they could have issued their fatwa themselves, but they wanted the Muslim world to be united on this decision. This is why they sent the embassy to Baghdad to really make sure that as an ummah we agree on this.
And also they were senior. That's a good point you've made, because what I'm trying to get to at here is, look, we have a situation that resembles in many ways the rapid decline of the Muslims in Al-Andalus. And what, although it didn't prevent it, it slowed it down a bit, was the intervention of a class of people who had certain qualities about them. You've mentioned one being that they were qualified in terms of religious knowledge, but also they sought to make consultation with those others who also qualified at a very high level, recognized people. It was an institutional effort, effectively, that was actually put in place to ensure that whatever happens after this will be legitimate. It's a legitimate intervention. It wasn't just random people. Ibn Tashfin was an elderly man. When he first arrived, he was 80 years old. So he had seniority, experience. He also had the taqwa. When they entered in that region, apparently the local Muslims were shocked at seeing these Berber warriors, faces covered. They had the veils, right? And very austere. Yeah, very austere.
There might be a shock. I'm not even talking. Let's imagine you're in the Battle of Sagrajas and you're a Christian, right? You're a Christian and you're in the front line and you're fighting the Muslims. And the front line of the Muslims has even, so we're talking about the emirs of the Taifa being courageous and brave. Al-Mu'tamid of Seville and Abdullah ibn Balqin of Granada were in the front line, were actually fighting. So this is also, imagine you're a Christian, and at some point to your flank you have a bunch of desert Bedouins, all covered. You can only see their eyes with spears and shields rushing to you. I can imagine that you don't feel you would feel some special kind of stress and and anxieties at this site. So yeah, a very good point about the way they were looking. They didn't look natural in that Andalusi luxurious.
Exactly. Yes, they were not decadents. These were people who came with rudimentary, and in fact it was a last call option, because there's a very famous anecdote that when the leaders of Al-Andalus were pressed for solutions and they realized, look, it's about time for us to make a hard decision. We either go back to North Africa or we remain here and we become the slaves of the of the Christians. I forget who said it, but he said that I'd rather be a camel herder in North Africa than be a pig herder, a pig farmer, in something like that. You know what I'm trying to say.
Al-Mu'tamid of Seville, he was talking with his son and taking his advice or his counsel about calling the Morabitun for help. And his son basically said, if you do this, you might not be in seat anymore. And this is where Al-Mu'tamid of Seville, this is where you see there's some taqwa and there is still some iman left, right, in those and this to me is very, very interesting and very important, that even if they were decadent in some way, they had the love of Islam in their, and the love for the deen. And he said that those words exactly. He said, I would rather be a camel herd or camel driver in North Africa than a pig herder in Castile.
And this is a very good point, because look, for those of us who reside, you're currently in Morocco. We'll get into that soon, inshallah. But for people like myself and others who reside in Europe or the new Al-Andalus to some degree, there is a point where we have to decide to be camel herders or to be pig farmers. In other words, do we make a move before things get worse, or do we remain where we are and are subjugated? But we need some sort of intervention. I think the Muslim world is a lot, from a perspective of the global perspective today, there is a need of intervention. But as we have seen in the case of Ibn Tumart, there are those who are charismatic and who present themselves as those who have the solution, but in the long-term perspective may not be the best people to head this wave of change effectively. But those who are in the best position, such as Ibn Tashfin and people who are under him, may not necessarily be the people we want to be in charge because they're too austere, or maybe the solution may not fit what we are effectively used to. So it's a compromise. The point is a compromise. The way the world is, the way I see it right now, is the way we are today, the Muslim world. There is a demand for let's unite, let's find a way of, but the reality is there is a great sacrifice necessary. Are we going to go back to being camel herders, or are we going to, where do we draw the line, and what exactly do we want out of this? Because the reality is, and has been in the past, there was never a monolithic solution. There were always problems, but it was a matter of deciding which problem was greater than the other one. Yeah, so.
Like it's a very fair point, and I am back in Morocco, but currently I'm residing in Europe, and I'm basically preparing myself to becoming a camel herder again. This is the decision that we took, and inshallah we hope to be able to achieve it in the next 2 years. But my point is, this decision, I think Muslims in the West at some point will have to, will come at the crossroad and will have to decide. Whatever is, I can't say whatever is the right option, but it definitely feels to me I would rather
a camel herder. Yes. I think we're going to have to think about that generally, just generally as a Muslim globally, because even within a Muslim land there are issues. But the point is, from a spiritual and intellectual perspective, are we going to go back to the rudimentals, the basics? Camel herding, or the basics of effectively, let's simplify things a bit. We may suffer for the short term, but are we willing to work hard from that foundation level to rebuild again? And that's a decision that I think we've been putting up for a long time. But considering what we're going through globally as a Muslim people, there has to be a point where we decide, the luxuries that we are holding on to, is it time to put it down for a bit and go back to being herders, and to go back to the and that's what I personally see Almoravid represented when they entered that region. People saw in them a people who were effectively living very simple lives, but still had within them the hunger and drive to make a change, and they did make a change.
Yusuf Ibn Tashfin lived 100 years, so from 400 Hijri to 500 Hijri. So this is a documented fact. There's no debate about it. In the 11th century, that gives us some matter for reflection, and we know that his diet was very rudimentary. In that time, they didn't have access to much. There was camel milk, camel meats. I think dates were introduced in the Muwahhidin, so a bit later. So even dates were not there, and water.
Very basic.
So very basic, and austere lives. But Allah Subhanahu wa Taala gave him the strength to go to war at the age of 79, I think. In the Battle of Sagrahas, he would have been
80, around 80. Yeah.
80, almost 80, yeah.
80, yeah.
Almost 80. And continue leading the Murabitun until he was 100-year-old, which is amazing, mashallah. And and that point about going back to the fundamentals. Recently, I've bumped into this what's clearly is an AI factored video of Sheikh Ibn Baz, I believe, saying things that he never said. An AI video, an AI creation, but a very, very convincing AI creation. And this for me was like, okay, we have to take a step back here. And how do we trust that anything is real anymore? And now, this for me led to the conclusion that we have to go back to the ulama and to studying under the feet of the ulama.
The basics. We need to go back to the basics, yeah.
This is something that you cannot touch or change or modify with AI, and this is always going to be the way that we transmit information from scholar to student and to. So to me, it feels like going back to basics is.
And I think to end on that note, before we get into your project, which is very exciting, it's a great analogy for all of us actually, that when you reach a level of decadence or a level of high, you could say, indulgence or ghafla, effectively, really. You forget because of the world and the material. The only solution is not to get more of that, material is actually to let go. Is to let go of things, to make sacrifice, to abandon certain things, to go back to being a herder in that metaphorical sense. That, I believe, is our problem today, that we're holding on to things that we should actually be letting go of. The nationalism, the divisions, all of that kind of stuff. But yes, so tell us, what exactly is the project currently? Because I know you set up a company. Shall let us know?
Yes, so our company is called Historiyyah, and so we're basically, we don't want to do history just in books and in videos and so on. We really want to make it a bit more concrete. So we're right now organizing trips to our area of expertise, which is Al-Andalus, and later on we hope to do also for a trip from in Morocco to walk the footsteps of the Morabitun, the Muwahhidun, and even later on the Saadi states, because there's some very exciting to see. So we're organizing these historical trips. Right now we're doing one every quarter. The next one will be end of June, then end of September, end of December, and so on. We have, you can find all details on our website. The idea is to also develop a network of brothers interested in Islamic history, and also try to connect the Ummah back to its roots, and to understand where we were, where we are, and where we can be in the future. So I think this is really something that we want to encourage and push. So all details are available on in our websites. You can also contact us on our WhatsApp group, and we'll be more than happy to discuss and answer your questions.
And what sort of activities or itinerary would people expect to have?
For the trip planned in June for Al-Andalus, we're basically going in the heartlands of the Al-Andalus. So we're going landing in Malaga airport, and then going straight to Cordoba. We'll spend a night there, a day there. We'll visit the different monuments that there is. For example, we have the Grand Mezquita of Cordoba, which is an amazing feat of architecture that is still living today. We'll go to Seville. Again, there's like so many things to see. From Seville, we'll go to Granada, where there's the famous Alhambra, Alhamra in Arabic, and very interestingly, in the area surrounding Granada, there's the Alpujarras mountains. This is the place where the last Muslims of Spain were living, and this is where we have today communities of Muslims.
Revival.
Exactly. We'll be giving them a visit, inshallah. This is going to be very, very, very exciting.
Brilliant. So the website is, we'll put it on screen anyway, Historiyyah.com, is it? YAH.com.
Historiyyah.com, HISTOREYYAH.com. I'll put it on the screen as you said. And yeah. And
just before you go, tell us a bit more about your website, your YouTube channel. I know you're a content creator like I am, and it's not an easy, you could say, endeavor to continue creating content. But I've seen your production is, mashallah, very, very beautiful and very well done. How long does it take to make one video, and what kind of effort does it goes into your production process effectively?
It takes a while. So you have the research part, obviously. We're constantly, I myself, because I'm constantly reading every day. I have my iPad and I have books every day, so I download regularly books. Alhamdulillah, we have some amazing resources online. You can look up noorbook.com. It's in Arabic for Arabic readers. There are some English books over there, and they're free for download. So there is no excuse today not to read, in my opinion. You have access to so many things online. So yeah, research part, scripting. So the actual script, it has to be an interesting script, and it has to be it has, in the YouTube scene, it has to answer the title that you have, because you have a title, you have a thumbnail. It has to be interesting enough that the person is intrigued and clicks, and also finds that the content matches. So there's a lot of marketing involved. You have the animation part, so basically the production of the assets, the art assets, the characters, the maps, the visual effects, and so on. You have the editing. You have and the sound, the voice recording, the voice cleaning, polishing.
On average, how long would it take? Just to give us an estimate so we can appreciate what goes behind making this content for one 10-minute video. On average, how long does it take you and your team?
Looking at the ultra high polish level, we're looking at 60 hours of editing and probably 40 hours of for the rest. If we're not, because there are some videos we realized at some point that we were spending too much time on the editing and the polishing part, and not enough on the actual part that matters to YouTube. Unfortunately, the marketing part. So we scaled down a bit the production time, but it would still take us a solid 60 hours in total if we put all of it together just to do one video. And alhamdulillah, we were able to make a group of collaborators that are working every month to bring you 10 modest minutes, humble minutes of production time. And inshallah, if we can do more in the future, we will.
Barakallahu Fik, well, I thank you for creating an avenue for those of us who are not as well versed in that history to be able to consume it in bite-sized chunks. And also I encourage everyone to go and check the channel, but also the website Historiyyah.com for those incursions. Hopefully in the future, as you mentioned, it will be extended to North Africa, to Morocco. And I look forward to having you back on this platform, inshallah, because there's a lot we haven't touched upon. You know?
There's a very exciting book that I want to touch upon, and maybe I'll say a couple of words about it. It's I'll give you just enough to have, to salivate.
On a cliffhanger.
By the Emir of Granada, Abdullah ibn Buluqin himself, the Emir of the Taifa of Granada, during his exile years after the Almoravids took over Spain, the Al-Andalus. He was exiled by Yusuf Ibn Tashfin personally, and he was living in his own house as a prisoner, but as you know, prisoners were treated as some form of forced guest. And he lived 5 years in exile and wrote a book about his time as a prince and emir of the Taifa of Granada, and his relationships with all the Taifa. So it's very interesting because it gives us the perspective of the Berber emirs against for example, the Arab Al-Mu'tamid of Seville. It's a different narration, or like a narrative style that we are used to, because most of the history of Andalus is written by Andalusi chroniclers like Ibn Hayyan, that were the chronicler of Abdul-Rahman III. So yeah, it's very, very fascinating. It's a first-person testimony to a lot of these events. We couldn't ask for a more fascinating book, and it's available in Arabic. I'm trying to get a hold of an English translation. It's very difficult. I found it in university, 90 kilometers from my house, so I'll have to get a trip there and see if I can borrow it.
Okay, so we will definitely be looking forward to that episode, inshallah. And thank you once again for taking time to share your knowledge with us. And we look forward to seeing you in a very, very, a very lengthy extension to this conversation. Barakallahu feekum.